Good morning, listeners. This is Joan with the Joan Jerkovich Show at 910 KINA Salina, bringing you innovative talk radio that surprises, entertains, and sometimes informs you. This morning, my guest is Jimmy Splekel, and he is an associate professor at K-State Salina in the aviation department, working there since 2000. He has his master's degree, but he also comes to us this morning because we want to talk to him about his military experience as an Army helicopter pilot for 23 years. Welcome, Jimmy.
Thank you, ma'am.
Well, good to talk to you. I've had a lot of fun conversation just before we even turned the microphones on this morning. So
it's been fun.
Hearing all about your professor, and your students out at K-State Salina, which is really a wonderful place for you to land after all your experience. But let's talk about your military experience. Tell me how you got into the military. Were you actually drafted, or did you volunteer?
I was being drafted in 1969 after 4 years of college, and decided that I wanted to do something besides tote a rifle, knowing that the Vietnam War was going on pretty hot and heavy at that time. And there was a recruiter in Wichita that was pushing flight school, helicopter flight school for the Army. And I said, it sounds good to me, and passed the exams and the physical exam. And the day before I was supposed to be inducted in the draft, I enlisted in the Army for flight school.
Now, why would you do that why would you actually enlist? Was there some benefit to that? Did that allow your place in the helicopter school?
It allowed me to get into that school.
Because otherwise they would have just taken you and put you wherever you wanted to go.
Correct, wherever they needed me before, as an infantryman or whatever. And that's what most of my cousins and friends had already been to Vietnam and back as draftees. And I said, I'd like to do something besides tote a rifle.
Because you'd heard some stories from them,
right,
your cousins and friends. So
right.
How old were you when you actually enlisted?
I was 22.
22 years old. Doesn't that seem young today? It does to me.
It does, but there were the draftees, and there were so many helicopter pilots that were friends of mine that were 4 or 5 years younger than I was.
They started them at 18.
Oh, yes.
Exactly.
The Army still has the program of high school to flight school. They do not require warrant officer aviators to have a college degree when they first start. So there were a lot of 18-year-old pilots in Vietnam.
So in other words, they could start right out of high school.
Yes.
But has that changed today, where
no,
they have to have?
The Army still has high school to flight school. It's the only service that does not require a bachelor's degree.
Okay. And the bachelor's degree, would that be something they would have obtained through the service or paid for by the service, military? Yes,
the GI Bill was active then, and most of the time for promotions, it was recommended that you do get at least an associate's degree, and most of the soldiers that I knew were working on getting a bachelor's degree, because when their career was over, they wanted to get out and get a good job as whatever they wanted to do, and they knew that a degree would be beneficial to them.
Absolutely. And tell us about your actual experience as a helicopter pilot. What were you doing? What were your missions?
Well, in Vietnam, I flew both UH-1s and OH-58s. The Huey, the UH-1s were troop carrying, and we did all kinds of combat assaults, putting troops on the ground or going in and picking them up, and then flying. The scout aircraft was more of going out and trying to find the bad guys, and lots of other assorted missions, from flying the chaplain and his entourage on a Sunday out to base camps for religious services, to resupply, to artillery adjustment, whatever was needed, we did.
So you saw actual active combat?
Yes.
When you were dropping the troops
600
down?
hours worth.
So how many total hours of flight time did you have in the helicopter military service? Total 600?
600 combat hours in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I got out in 92, I had right at 5,000 hours.
Wow. So did you ever feel you were in danger yourself? I mean, were you getting shot at?
Yes, many times.
Many times. What was that like?
Well, initially...
Put us in the seat of a helicopter pilot. I mean, it's been long enough that I feel you seem comfortable talking about it because I'm respectful of that, but...
I don't have any problem talking about it. It was very frightening at first, and that's why you rode around as a co-pilot for the first couple of months till you got used to it. I got indoctrinated pretty early in my tour. We were shot up pretty badly and forced down about 3 weeks after I got there. So,
oh my! Still as a co-pilot though.
Still as a co-pilot.
Got
yes.
shot down.
Yeah.
So you and your pilot had to land safely.
You're right.
Were you able to do that?
We were able to land about probably half a mile or three-quarters of a mile away from where we were shot up, and luckily there was another aircraft in the area that had just inserted some troops, and that's what we were doing, was inserting a ranger team that was going to go out and do some scouting to find some of the bad guys, and we ended up finding them for them.
You found them. Was that on a scouting mission?
No, it was on an insertion mission.
So where you were dropping troops, and then they do they target a certain area of a helicopter to bring it down, or it's just shoot at it? Yeah, just shoot, right. And then do you know as a pilot that, even though you've been hit and you're going to be coming down to get away from the conflict, did you know this area you were first landing in, that 3 weeks in, that was safe? Or it just get down safe?
Just get away from there, and then the aircraft was losing power, and so we had to land. And,
it's a frantic moment. Unbelievable.
We were on the ground probably about 5 minutes, and it seemed like a lot longer, and we were picked up right away.
I can imagine time sort of stood still. So here you were a 24-year-old young man, 3 weeks in, and you had to be seeing your life, in a sense, flash before your eyes.
Oh, yeah. Wondering what I got myself into.
Absolutely. Knowing you were going to be drafted, but you also volunteered and put yourself in this situation.
Right. And you become kind of numb to it in a sense after a while. You're there to do your job.
Right.
And the mission is to get accomplished, and you want to support the troops that you're either inserting or extracting, or if you're out doing resupply missions or whatever, then you do it to the best of your ability. And I don't say you get nonchalant about it, but you become a little callous to the ground fire.
Well, and you said something about your camaraderie and the buddies and stuff. Were you there supporting each other with all of this?
Very much so. Very much so.
Tell me about the bonds that all of you develop being in these life and death situations. Well,
I think those friends that are friends for life, and I keep in contact with some of them. Some of them I would never know by name and never will know by name, but it's a very special bond that grows when you're in combat with others.
It's such a unique situation that most of us never, hopefully will experience, and especially being female. I don't think we have women. Do we have women in active combat right now? We do?
Yes, we do.
Yes, we do. They're on the ground carrying the guns, hard to
flying the aircraft.
The pilots, everything. Sure. But then there weren't the women in the military that there are today
in
the Vietnam War.
There were women there.
Women were there serving, yes.
In the medical role or whatever.
Absolutely. But not in the active combat and that at that time.
But that's the thing that a lot of people don't realize, is that you might not be out on the front lines or out in the area of combat, but you're still in a combat zone where things happen. You get mortared,
That's a good point,
rocketed,
because
at your base camp. So even those that weren't going out on a regular basis to take the war to the enemy brought the war to, and they still are in our bases in Iran and in Afghanistan too, Iraq and Afghanistan.
So the base camp is still at risk.
Sure, absolutely.
I mean, it's somewhat of a safer
zone,
but it's not.
You can never say, well, you didn't have. You should not have any type of post syndrome or
post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD,
or anything like that, because you're just as endangered, or not nearly as much, but you are in danger in the base camp too, so in the rear areas.
You know, PTSD is actually more recognized, I think, today. So what do you say, what was it like for Vietnam veterans or Vietnam soldiers? Was it really recognized as much as it is today?
Definitely not.
Right.
I think that I know a few that probably will never talk about their experiences, and I think that's probably one of the reasons why, is because they have some of that. I think the majority of us, though, coming back, were not traumatized by the war. We were more traumatized by how we were treated when we returned.
That is such a big issue that I want to get into. Tell me about that.
Well,
you're hesitating for a reason. It's a very difficult subject.
It is.
You were
really
treated so differently than servicemen today. Not treated as, in my opinion, the way you should have been.
Right. It's one of the reasons, probably the biggest reasons I stayed in the military, because I didn't like the civilian world when I got back here.
So much unrest, so much protest,
right? And
for you to even come back as a Vietnam veteran.
You were either accused of supporting an unjust war, or whatever, or being pointed at and pointed out, and
in malicious ways.
In malicious ways at
My
times.
goodness.
Oh yes. We were told to immediately, when we landed back in the United States, to take off our military uniform and put on civilian clothes, because you're going to be attacked by somebody, not physically but verbally attacked by somebody.
You know, Jimmy, that gives me chills, because I have been in airports where when a uniformed service person walks by, they are the strangers sitting there waiting for a flight will stand up and applaud them.
Right. Much different now.
And you were told to ditch into a bathroom or something and change out of your uniform into civilian clothes, so that you weren't targeted in a hateful way.
Exactly.
You know, what did that do for morale?
Well, I think it was, we had that's why I stayed in, like I said, and so you were right at home on the military installation, where you didn't have that.
Yeah, you were supported there, but you were not in society at the time.
Right.
And that's one reason, you know, our next guest coming up, Ken Bernard, is also a Vietnam veteran, said the same thing. I mean, when I first talked with both of you about coming in for an interview, I mean, that was just resounding when this comment about coming home. I mean, he was ashamed. He said, take the banners down. I don't even want to be known as a veteran from this war. And we're going to have to take a little bit of a break here, Jimmy, but I want, again, people, please be sure and stay tuned to hear what Ken has to say about some of this, because we're going to have to take just a short break. And this is Joan on the Joan Jerkovich Show, and be sure to go to our video outtakes, podcasting, and a link to our iTunes at joanjerkovich.com. This is the Joan Jerkovich Show on 910 KINA Salina. This is Joan with the Joan Jerkovich Show at 910 KINA Salina. Again, be sure to stay tuned for our next guest, Ken Bernard. He'll be talking also about his military experience in the Vietnam War. We're back with Jimmy, 23-year Army helicopter pilot in the Vietnam era. So Jimmy and I have been having a lot of good information and talk about before we went to break and also on break. So go to joanjerkovich.com to watch the video outtakes. But I want to get back to some more of this about, you know, coming back and just this sense of embarrassment and shame, and the difference that you had with coming back as a Vietnam serviceman who wasn't lauded for your efforts.
Yeah, there were very few people that would pat you on the back and say, welcome home. And it's a lot different now. I'm very happy to see the soldiers coming back. And the biggest thing is we went as replacements to Vietnam individually, most of us, later on in the war.